The Sunday morning sun blazed down on the makeshift meeting ground outside Abiquiu, New Mexico territory, where Hannah Rivers stood before a crowd of rough miners with a worn Bible clutched in her small hands, her voice rising clear and strong despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs, knowing full well that most men in this harsh land of 1882 would sooner spend their Sabbath drinking whiskey than listening to a young woman preach the Word of God. Hannah had arrived in Abiquiu 3 months earlier with her uncle, a shopkeeper who had promised her dying father he would take care of his only daughter. But Uncle Thomas had been murdered 2 weeks after their arrival, shot down in a dispute over a mining claim that had nothing to do with him, except that he had witnessed the wrong confrontation at the wrong time. At 20 years old, Hannah found herself alone in a territory that seemed to devour the weak and unprepared. She could have returned east, could have written to distant cousins in Philadelphia, but something in her spirit refused to flee. The miners had been kind to her in their own rough way. They ensured she had enough food, that nobody bothered her in the small cabin she now occupied alone. In return, she had started reading to them on Sunday mornings, first from newspapers and novels, then from Scripture. Most of them were lonely men, far from any family they might have once known, and they seemed to crave something beyond the endless cycle of digging and drinking that defined their lives. On this particular Sunday, as Hannah opened her Bible to the book of Psalms, she noticed a man she had never seen before standing at the back of the gathered crowd. He was tall, lean in the way men became when they spent long days in the saddle without regular meals. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the sun-weathered planes of his face, the dark stubble along his jaw, and something in his eyes that looked haunted despite the clear morning light. Warren Ingram had ridden into Abiquiu the night before with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a soul so heavy with regret he wondered if he would ever feel light again. He was 24 years old and had spent the last 6 years living as wildly as the untamed land around him. He had worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, had gambled and fought and chased every vice available to a young man with more freedom than wisdom. 3 weeks ago, his best friend had died in his arms after a gunfight outside a saloon in Santa Fe, a fight that Warren had started over a perceived insult that now seemed meaningless. As Joe's blood had soaked into the dust, he had looked up at Warren and whispered, "Was it worth it? Any of it?" Those words had followed Warren across every mile since then. He had heard there was work in Abiquiu, but more than that, he had heard about a young woman who reads Scripture on Sundays, and something desperate in him wanted to hear words that might offer redemption, even if he doubted any existed for a man like him. Hannah's voice carried across the morning air as she read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Warren felt something crack open inside his chest at those words. He restoreth my soul. Was such a thing even possible? Could a soul as damaged as his be restored? He found himself listening with an intensity that surprised him, hanging on every word this young woman spoke. Hannah continued reading, her voice never faltering, though she was acutely aware of the stranger's attention. There was something different about him compared to the miners who gathered each week. They came with open, simple hearts, seeking comfort and community. This man came carrying darkness like a physical weight, and yet beneath that darkness, she sensed a desperate hunger for light. When she finished the reading, she closed the Bible and looked out at the assembled men. "We are all lost at times," she said quietly, "every one of us. But the promise of faith is that being lost is not the end of our story. There is always a path back, always grace sufficient for our needs, no matter how far we have wandered." The miners nodded, some murmuring agreement. They began to disperse, several stopping to thank Hannah, to press small gifts into her hands. A few eggs from someone's hen, a jar of preserves, a bundle of firewood. She accepted each offering with genuine gratitude, knowing these men had little to spare. Warren hung back, uncertain. He wanted to speak to her but had no idea what he would say. His tongue, usually quick with jokes and boasts, felt thick and useless in his mouth. As the last of the miners drifted away toward their claims or back toward town, Hannah began gathering her things, and Warren found himself walking forward as if pulled by a rope. "Miss," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. That was well spoken. Hannah looked up at him, and Warren felt the full force of her gaze. Her eyes were a clear gray blue, like the sky before a storm, and they seemed to see straight through all his bravado to the frightened, guilty man beneath. "Thank you," Hannah said simply. "I have not seen you here before. Just rode in last night. Name's Warren Ingram." He held out his hand, then realized he still wore his gloves. He yanked them off clumsily and offered his hand again. Hannah hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip careful as if he feared he might hurt her. "Hannah Rivers." "Welcome to Abiquiu, Mr. Ingram. Just Warren is fine." He released her hand, suddenly aware of how improper it was for him to be standing here talking to an unchaperoned young woman. But there were no rules of propriety that held much sway in a mining camp. "What you said about being lost. Do you really believe there's always a way back?" The question came out more vulnerable than he had intended, and he nearly turned and walked away. But Hannah's expression softened, and she nodded. "I do believe it, not because the way is easy, but because grace is not something we earn. It is freely given if we are willing to accept it." Warren wanted to believe her, wanted it with a fierceness that startled him. "I have done things," he began, then stopped. How could he explain to this obviously decent woman the kind of life he had led? "I am not a good man, Miss Rivers." "Hannah," she corrected gently. "And I did not say the path was only for good people. If that were the case, we would all be barred from it. We are all sinners, Warren. The question is whether we wish to remain in that state or walk toward something better." Before Warren could respond, a shout erupted from the direction of town. Both of them turned to see men running, and then the sharp crack of gunfire split the morning air. Warren's hand went instinctively to his hip, but he had left his gun belt at the boarding house, one of his small attempts at leaving his old life behind. "Stay here," he commanded Hannah, already moving toward the commotion. "Like hell," Hannah said, hiking up her skirts and running after him. Warren glanced back in surprise. He had not expected a woman who reads scripture to curse, even mildly, and certainly had not expected her to run toward danger rather than away from it. But there was no time to argue. They reached the main street to find a scene of chaos. Two men on horseback were riding through, firing pistols in the air and laughing. The few townspeople on the street had scattered, taking cover in doorways and behind water troughs. Warren recognized the type immediately. Young, drunk or close to it, filled with the kind of reckless energy that came from boredom and too much power. "What's happening?" Hannah asked, breathless beside him. An older miner crouched near them provided the answer. "Them's the Carson brothers. They got a claim up north and think they own this whole territory. Come into town every few weeks and tear the place up. Sheriff does not do nothing about it." Warren felt anger kindle in his gut. He had been these men or close enough. He had been the one making decent people afraid, acting like the world owed him something. The shame of it burned through him. One of the Carson brothers, the younger one by the look of him, spotted Hannah. Even from 30 feet away, Warren could see his expression change, could see the predatory interest light up his face. The man wheeled his horse around and rode straight toward them. "Well, well," the man called out. "Pretty thing like you should not be hiding in the dirt. Come on out here and give us a smile." Hannah stood up, and Warren's hand shot out to stop her, but she evaded his grasp. She walked out into the street, chin high, and looked up at the mounted man without a trace of fear. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said clearly. "Frightening people who have done you no harm. What kind of man acts this way?" The Carson brother's face darkened. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by a woman. "You got a mouth on you. Maybe somebody should teach you to watch your tongue." Warren was moving before he fully decided to, stepping out into the street and placing himself between Hannah and the mounted man. "Maybe you should ride on," he said, his voice steady and cold in a way he had not used since deciding to change his life. "The lady has asked you to leave. Be smart and listen." The Carson brother looked Warren up and down, assessing him. Whatever he saw made him pause. Warren might not be wearing his guns, but he carried himself like someone who knew how to use them, and more importantly, like someone who was not afraid to die. That made him dangerous in a way that most men could recognize on an instinct level. "You her man?" the Carson brother asked. "I am a man who is telling you to move along," Warren replied evenly. For a long moment, the tension stretched taut as a rope about to break. The other Carson brother had ridden up now, and he was older, more sober, and apparently more sensible. He grabbed his brother's reins. "Come on, Jack, not worth it today. We got business to attend to." Jack Carson stared hard at Warren, then spat in the dirt. "This is not over." "It is if you are smart," Warren said. The brothers rode off, still making noise but heading out of town. The streets slowly came back to life as people emerged from their hiding places. Warren turned to find Hannah watching him with an unreadable expression. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Warren ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. Men like that only understand strength. If nobody stands up to them, they keep getting worse. You could have been killed. "I have been risking death for stupid reasons for years," Warren said quietly. "At least this time it would have been for something worthwhile." Hannah's expression shifted, softening. "Come have coffee with me," she said. "I think we should talk." Warren followed Hannah to her cabin, a small structure on the edge of town that looked barely sturdy enough to survive a strong wind. Inside, it was spotlessly clean but sparse. A bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and shelves lined with books. More books than he would have expected anyone to own out here. Hannah busied herself making coffee while Warren stood awkwardly by the door, unsure whether to sit or remain standing. The adrenaline from the confrontation was draining away, leaving him shaky. "Sit down before you fall down," Hannah said without looking at him. "You have gone pale." Warren sank into one of the chairs. It was true that his legs felt unsteady. He was no stranger to violence, but something about this time felt different. Maybe because he had been trying so hard to leave that life behind, and yet the first thing he had done in this new town was step into a potential gunfight. Hannah set a cup of coffee in front of him and sat down across the table with her own. Steam rose between them in the shaft of sunlight coming through the window. "Tell me about what happened," she said. "Whatever it is that brought you here looking like you are carrying the weight of the world." Warren wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth despite the heat of the day. He had not talked about Joe to anyone, had barely let himself think about it, but something about Hannah's direct gaze and quiet patience made him want to try. "I had a friend," he began haltingly. "Joe. We rode together for 3 years. He was a better man than me, always had been. More patient, kinder, but he followed my lead because that is what friends do, I guess." Warren stared into his coffee. 3 weeks ago, we were in a saloon in Santa Fe. I got into an argument with a man over a card game. It was stupid, the kind of thing I should have let go, but I was drunk and proud and I let it escalate. When we took it outside, the man's brother showed up. He had a gun drawn before any of us realized what was happening. Joe pushed me out of the way, took the bullet meant for me. His voice cracked and he had to stop and breathe. Hannah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture was simple, but it steadied him. He died there in the street. Last thing he said to me was to ask if any of it had been worth it, and I realized it was not. None of it. Not the drinking or the fighting or the gambling. I had been wasting my life, and Joe paid the price for my stupidity. "So you came here," Hannah said softly. "I came here wanting to be different, wanting to find some kind of meaning, but today showed me I have not changed at all. First sign of trouble and I was ready to fight." "No," Hannah said firmly. "Today showed that you are capable of courage in defense of others. That is entirely different from fighting for your own pride. You stood up for people who needed help. That is not the old Warren. That is the man you are trying to become." Warren looked at her, wanting desperately to believe her words. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see you," Hannah said simply. "I see someone who is genuinely trying to change. That is the hardest thing a person can do. Most people never even attempt it." They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee. Warren felt something he had not experienced in a long time. Peace, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. "Tell me about you," he said. "How does a young woman end up alone in a place like this, reading scripture to minors?" Hannah's expression clouded, and Warren immediately regretted asking, but she took a breath and answered. "I came here with my uncle 3 months ago. He was killed in a shooting, wrong place at the wrong time." Her voice was steady, but Warren could hear the grief beneath it. "I should have left, gone back east, but I felt like God was telling me to stay. These men here, they are lonely and lost and nobody cares about their souls. I thought maybe I could help." "You are brave," Warren said. "Braver than most men I know." "I am terrified most of the time," Hannah admitted with a small smile. "But fear is not a good enough reason to abandon people who need help." Warren found himself smiling back. There was something remarkable about this woman, something that made him want to be the kind of man who deserved to know her. Over the next few weeks, Warren became a regular fixture at Hannah's Sunday gatherings. He found work at one of the mining operations, doing the back-breaking labor of hauling ore from the depths of the earth to the surface. It was hard, honest work, and it felt like penance. Each shovelful of rock, each aching muscle, was a small payment against the debt he owed for the life he had wasted. But the Sundays were different. Those were the days he allowed himself to hope. He would stand among the miners, listening to Hannah read from the Bible, her voice clear and unwavering. She would talk about forgiveness and redemption, about how God could make all things new, and Warren would let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, it was true. He and Hannah began spending time together outside of the Sunday gatherings. He would help her with tasks around her cabin, fixing the roof, chopping wood, repairing the stove. She would feed him dinner afterward, and they would sit and talk as the sun set and the desert air cooled. Warren learned that Hannah had wanted to be a teacher before coming west. She had attended a small college in Philadelphia, had studied literature and theology. She was intelligent in a way that intimidated him at first, until he realized she never made him feel stupid for his lack of formal education. Hannah learned that Warren had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 5 brothers. He had left home at 17, restless and eager to see the world. He had thought he was seeking adventure, but now he understood he had really just been running away from the responsibility of becoming a man. You ever think about going back?" Hannah asked one evening as they sat on the steps of her cabin, watching the stars emerge. "Sometimes," Warren admitted, "but I do not know if I would be welcome. I left angry, said things I regret, have not written in years." "It is never too late to make amends," Hannah said gently. "If that is something you want." Warren considered this. The truth was, he had been so focused on his personal redemption that he had not thought much about the specific people he had hurt along the way. His family, friends he had abandoned, debts he had left unpaid. The work of changing his life was larger than he had realized. "I do not know where to start," he said honestly. "Start where you are," Hannah said. "With the people around you now, build a good life here, become someone your family would be proud of, and then reach back to them. Let your actions speak before your words." It was good advice, and Warren took it to heart. He began to be more intentional about his life in Abiquiu. He joined Hannah's Sunday services not just as an observer but as a participant, sometimes helping her set up, sometimes leading the men in a hymn. He was no singer, but his rough voice blended with the others, and there was something powerful about that unity. He also began working with some of the younger men in town, boys who reminded him of himself at that age. Restless, angry, looking for trouble because they did not know how to look for purpose. He tried to be for them what Joe had been for him, a steadying presence, even when he did not feel steady himself. And through it all, he found himself falling in love with Hannah Rivers. It happened gradually, then all at once. He would be hauling ore and suddenly think of something she had said, and it would make him smile despite the exhaustion. He would be trying to sleep and remember the way she laughed, full and genuine, and feel warmth spread through his chest. He noticed everything about her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, the way her whole face lit up when she talked about something she cared about. He was in love, and it terrified him. Because what did he have to offer a woman like Hannah? He was a former gunslinger trying to rebuild his life from nothing. He had no real prospects, no property, nothing but a slowly forming determination to be better. And she was educated, good, pure in a way he could never be. Why would she want him? But there were moments when he caught her looking at him, and he wondered if maybe, impossibly, she felt something too. The way her hand would linger when she passed him something. The way her smile seemed different for him, softer and more personal. The way she always seemed to know exactly where he was in a crowd, her eyes finding his. 2 months after Warren arrived in Abiquiu, the Carson brothers returned. This time they did not just ride through town causing a ruckus. They came with purpose. It turned out that one of the mining claims they held overlapped with several smaller claims worked by the men who attended Hannah's Sunday services. The Carsons wanted the smaller operators gone, and they were not interested in legal proceedings. The trouble started on a Saturday night. Warren was at the boarding house when he heard shouting. By the time he reached the street, several buildings were on fire, including the assay office where the mining claims were recorded. Men ran back and forth with buckets, trying to stop the flames from spreading, but it was clear the assay office was a loss. "It was the Carsons," someone shouted. "Saw them riding away." Warren felt rage rise in him, the old familiar feeling that had led to so much trouble. But this time, it was different. This time, it was righteous anger at injustice, not wounded pride. The Carsons were trying to destroy people's livelihoods, to terrorize a community that had done them no harm. The sheriff, a lazy man who spent most of his time drunk, made a half-hearted attempt to form a posse, but gave up when the Carsons' reputation made men reluctant to volunteer. Warren watched this display with disgust. The next morning, Sunday, the miners gathered for Hannah's service with a different energy. They were angry, afraid, talking about leaving Abiquiu rather than fighting the Carsons. Hannah listened to them, her face troubled. When it was time for her to speak, she stood before them and was quiet for a long moment. "I understand your fear," she said finally, "and I understand the temptation to run, but I want to read you something." She opened her Bible to a passage she had marked, from the book of Nehemiah. "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when our enemies heard that we were rebuilding, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." She looked up at the assembled men. The people in this story were afraid too. They had enemies who wanted to destroy what they were building, but they did not run. They prayed and they prepared to defend what was theirs. They did both, faith and action together. One of the miners, an older man named Samuel, spoke up. "Are you saying we should fight the Carsons?" "I am saying you should not let evil win through intimidation," Hannah said. "I am saying your claims are legal and just, and you have a right to defend them. I am saying that sometimes faith requires courage, not just in spiritual matters but in practical ones." Warren felt pride surge through him. This woman, who preached peace and forgiveness, also understood that some things were worth fighting for. She was not naive about the world's darkness. She simply refused to let it have the final word. After the service, a group of miners gathered to talk strategy. Warren found himself in the middle of it, his years of experience suddenly valuable. He helped them plan defenses for their claims, organize watches, gather what weapons they had. It was not a war they wanted, but they would be ready if the Carsons forced the issue. Hannah watched all this with a mixture of approval and worry. That evening, when the planning was done and the men had dispersed, she pulled Warren aside. "I am afraid for you," she said quietly. "The Carsons will not take this resistance lightly. They will come back with violence." "I know," Warren said. "But Hannah, you were right this morning. Some things are worth standing for. These men deserve to work their claims in peace. And more than that, I need to do this. Not for glory or revenge, but because it is right. Because it is the kind of man I want to be." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. "When you first came here, you were so full of guilt and pain. Now look at you. You have become a leader, someone people trust and follow. You have found your purpose." "I found you," Warren said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "You showed me a different way to live. Everything good in me now, it started with listening to you that first Sunday." Hannah reached up and touched his face, her palm soft against his rough cheek. "Warren Ingram, you did the hard work yourself. I just held up a mirror so you could see who you really were beneath all the mistakes." Warren covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. "Hannah, I am in love with you. I know I have nothing to offer, no real future yet, but I am building towards something. I am becoming someone worthy, and I am in love with you." "You already are worthy," Hannah said, and then she stood on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and full of promise. Warren wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if she might break, and kissed her back with all the tenderness he had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you too," Hannah whispered. "I think I have since that first day when you stood up for me against the Carsons. You were trying so hard to be different from who you had been, and I could see your good heart fighting to break through." Warren rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed with emotion. He had thought himself beyond redemption, beyond deserving love, and yet here was this incredible woman loving him anyway. It felt like grace made tangible. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "I know it is fast, and I know I am not much of a catch yet, but marry me." Let me spend the rest of my life becoming the man you deserve." Hannah laughed, the sound like music. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." They held each other as the sun set, and Warren felt something he had not experienced since Joe's death. He felt hope, real, solid hope for a future that could be good. But that future would have to wait, because 3 days later the Carsons made their move. They came at dawn with 10 hired guns, riding hard toward the mining claims. The miners had expected this and were ready, positioned behind hastily built barriers with their rifles. Warren was among them, back in his gun belt for the first time in months. It felt heavy and uncomfortable, a reminder of who he had been, but he bore it because it was necessary. The Carsons and their men reined up about 100 yards out, close enough to talk but far enough to be out of easy rifle range. "You have one chance to clear out peaceful," Jack Carson shouted. "Abandon your claims and leave. Otherwise, we take them by force." Warren stood up from behind his barrier, rifle lowered but ready. "These claims are legal and registered. You have no right to them. Turn around and leave." "They were registered in a building we burned down," Jack Carson shouted back. "As far as anyone can prove, these claims do not exist." So that had been their plan all along. Destroy the records and take the land by force. It was smart in a vicious way, and it might have worked if the miners had not found their courage. "We all know these claims exist," Warren called back. "Every man in Abiquiu knows. You want them, you will have to kill us all, and that is too many witnesses even for you." There was a long, tense silence. Warren could feel his heart pounding, could feel the old familiar readiness for violence humming through his veins. But this was different. This was not a drunken fight or a defense of wounded pride. This was standing between evil and innocent people. This was what Joe would have done. The older Carson brother, Tom, was talking to Jack urgently. Warren could not hear the words, but he could see the argument. Tom seemed to be counseling retreat, while Jack clearly wanted blood. The hired guns sat their horses uneasily, clearly not eager to charge into a prepared position where they would take casualties. Finally, Tom prevailed. He wheeled his horse around and started riding away. Jack stared at Warren with pure hatred for a moment longer, then followed his brother. The hired guns scattered like leaves in wind, relieved not to be fighting. A cheer went up from the miners behind the barriers. They had won, not through violence but through simple willingness to stand their ground. Warren lowered his rifle, feeling exhaustion wash over him. He had been prepared to kill today, prepared to die, and the fact that neither had been necessary felt like a small miracle. Hannah appeared seemingly from nowhere, running across the open ground to reach him. Warren barely had time to register her presence before she threw herself into his arms, and he caught her and held her tight. "I heard the shouting," she said against his chest. "I thought there would be shooting. I was so afraid." "I am all right," Warren said, stroking her hair. "We all are." They backed down. "Thank God," Hannah said, and Warren echoed the sentiment silently. The next few weeks brought a kind of peace to Abiquiu. The Carsons did not return, apparently deciding the claims were not worth the trouble after all. The sheriff, embarrassed by his earlier cowardice, actually investigated the arson and found enough evidence to issue warrants for the Carson brothers. They fled New Mexico territory, and the miners were able to work in peace. Warren and Hannah began planning their wedding. It would be small, just the miners and townsfolk who had become their community, but that was exactly what they wanted. Hannah had no family to invite, and Warren was not yet ready to reach out to his. That was something he planned to do after the wedding, after he had more to show them than just intentions. They were married on a Sunday morning in late October 1882, with the autumn sun warm on their faces and the whole town gathered to witness. Hannah wore a simple white dress that one of the mining wives had helped her make, and Warren wore his best clothes, freshly washed and mended. He had even gotten a haircut and shaved carefully that morning. Samuel, the older miner who had become like a father to many of the men, performed the ceremony. He was not ordained, but in a place like Abiquiu, people made do. The words he spoke were simple and heartfelt, about love and commitment and building a life together in hard times. When it came time for the vows, Warren took Hannah's hands in his and looked into her eyes. He had prepared words, but they fled his mind. Instead, he spoke from his heart. "Hannah, I came to this town lost and broken, convinced I was beyond saving. You saw something in me I could not see in myself. You showed me that change was possible, that redemption was real. You gave me faith, not just in God, but in myself. I promise to spend every day of my life becoming a man worthy of your love. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to build a good life with you. I promise to be honest and faithful and true. I love you with everything I am and everything I am becoming." Hannah's eyes were bright with tears. "Warren, you say I saved you, but you saved me too. After my uncle died, I was so alone and frightened. You gave me courage by your example. You showed me that strength can be gentle, that warriors can be kind. You became the man you wanted to be through sheer force of will, and that inspired me to be braver than I thought possible. I promise to stand beside you in all things. I promise to be your partner, your helpmate, your love. I promise to believe in you always. I love you with my whole heart." They exchanged simple gold bands that Warren had bought from a traveling merchant, and then Samuel pronounced them husband and wife. Warren kissed Hannah as the crowd cheered, and he felt a joy so complete it was almost painful. The celebration afterward was lively, with food and music and dancing. Someone produced a fiddle, and the miners took turns dancing with Hannah while Warren watched with a smile. These rough men were so gentle with her, treating her like the treasure she was, and it made him love them all a little bit. As evening fell, Warren and Hannah slipped away to the cabin that was now officially theirs together. Inside, Warren lit lamps while Hannah stood in the center of the room, looking suddenly shy. "I do not really know what to do now," she admitted with a small laugh. Warren crossed to her and took her hands. "Neither do I, honestly, but we will figure it out together. That is what marriage is, right? Figuring things out together." Hannah smiled and relaxed. "I like that." They spent their first night as husband and wife talking more than anything else, lying in bed and sharing stories and dreams until exhaustion finally claimed them. It was sweet and intimate and perfect in its simplicity. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Warren continued working at the mine, but he was also setting aside money toward buying his own claim. He had talked to the other miners and learned the business, and he thought he had a good eye for promising locations. Hannah continued her Sunday services, which had grown to include not just miners but families as well. Abiquiu was slowly becoming more civilized, and Hannah's presence was a large part of that. They were happy in a way Warren had never imagined possible. Simple things brought him joy. Coming home to find Hannah reading by lamplight, sharing meals together at their small table, working side by side in the garden they had started behind the cabin, the way she laughed at his jokes, the way she fit perfectly in his arms at night. 6 months into their marriage, Hannah announced she was pregnant. Warren received the news with a mixture of joy and terror. He was going to be a father. He, who had spent so much of his life being irresponsible and reckless, would be responsible for a child. The weight of it was enormous. Hannah saw his fear and took his face in her hands. "You are going to be a wonderful father. You are strong and protective and kind. Our child will be blessed to have you." "What if I do not know how?" Warren asked. "What if I make the same mistakes my father made or worse?" "Then we will fix them together," Hannah said firmly. "No parent is perfect, Warren. We simply do our best and trust God with the rest." Warren drew strength from her confidence. He threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He reinforced the cabin's walls and roof, making sure it would withstand any weather. He worked extra hours at the mine, saving every penny toward a future for his growing family. The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Warren worried constantly. Every time Hannah felt unwell, every unusual symptom sent him into a panic. She bore his anxieties with patient amusement, assuring him that everything was normal and natural. Their son was born on a hot June afternoon in 1883. The birth was attended by two mining wives who had experience with such things, while Warren paced outside the cabin and prayed more fervently than he ever had in his life. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and angry and alive, he nearly collapsed with relief. One of the women opened the door. "You can come in now. You have a son." Warren entered to find Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. She smiled at him, and he crossed the room in 2 long strides to kneel beside the bed. "Meet William," Hannah said softly, pulling back the blanket so Warren could see the baby's face. William. They had chosen the name together after Warren's grandfather, a man Warren remembered as gentle and wise. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was red-faced from crying, but to Warren, he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" Warren asked, his voice rough. Hannah carefully transferred the baby into Warren's arms, showing him how to support the head. Warren looked down at his son and felt his entire world reorganize around this tiny person. Everything he had worked for, everything he had become, suddenly had even more meaning. He was not just building a good life for himself anymore. He was building a legacy for William. "I promise you," Warren whispered to the baby, "I will be the father you deserve. I will teach you to be strong and kind. I will show you what it means to be a good man. I will never let you doubt that you are loved." Hannah reached out and took Warren's hand, and they stayed like that for a long time, the three of them together, a family. The years that followed were full of work and growth. Warren bought his own mining claim when William was 1 year old, and it proved to be a good one. Not rich by any means, but steady. It provided enough income that Hannah did not have to worry about money, though she was never extravagant in her needs. They had 2 more children in the following years. A daughter they named Hope, born in 1885, and another son they named Thomas, after Hannah's uncle, born in 1887. The cabin grew crowded, so Warren built an addition, then eventually a whole new house. It was modest but solid, with room for the children to grow. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved hearing his father's stories about the old days, though Warren always emphasized the lessons he had learned rather than glorifying his past mistakes. Hope was spirited and fearless, often found climbing trees or exploring the desert despite her mother's worries. Thomas was quiet and gentle, with a love for books that reminded Warren of Hannah. Hannah continued her Sunday services, which had evolved into a proper church. The miners had built a small building specifically for worship, with real pews and even a bell. Hannah preached there every Sunday, and Warren sat in the front row with their children, feeling proud beyond words. Warren stayed active in the community, serving on the town council and helping to bring more order and civility to Abiquiu. The wild lawlessness that had characterized the town when he first arrived had faded, replaced by something resembling civilization. There was a real school now where Hope and William attended classes. There was a doctor, a permanent sheriff, even a small library that Hannah had helped establish. But Warren never forgot where he had come from. He made a point of reaching out to troubled young men, offering them the same kind of patient guidance that Hannah had shown him. Some took the help, some did not, but he kept trying. It was his way of honoring Joe's memory and paying forward the grace he had received. He also finally wrote to his family in Missouri. It took him 3 years of marriage to work up the courage, and the first letter was painfully difficult to compose. He apologized for leaving the way he had, for the years of silence, for the pain he had caused. He told them about Hannah and William, about the life he was building, about the man he was trying to be. He did not expect a response, but one came 6 weeks later. His mother wrote that she had prayed for him every day since he left, that she had never stopped loving him, that all was forgiven. His brothers added notes expressing similar sentiments. The letter made Warren weep, and Hannah held him while he did, understanding that these were tears of healing. In 1888, when William was 5 years old, Warren's mother and one of his brothers came to visit. It was a joyful reunion, bittersweet because Warren's father had passed away 2 years earlier, but full of love nonetheless. His mother adored Hannah and the children, and she stayed for 3 months before returning to Missouri with promises to visit again. The visit healed something deep in Warren that he had not realized still hurt. He had been forgiven, not just by God or by himself, but by the people he had abandoned. It was a profound gift, and it made him even more determined to live a life worthy of that forgiveness. As the years passed, Warren watched his children grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. William developed a gift for words and eventually became a teacher himself. Hope, true to her nature, married a surveyor and spent her life traveling the territories, mapping the wild places. Thomas became a doctor, studying back east before returning to practice in New Mexico. All 3 children knew the story of how their parents met, how their father had come to a Sunday service seeking redemption and found love instead. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that change was always possible. Warren and Hannah grew old together in Abiquiu. The town continued to change around them, becoming more settled, more connected to the broader world. The railroad came through in 1892, bringing even more growth. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. They took walks together in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about their day or their children, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that long married couples can share. They still attended church every Sunday, though younger people led the services now. They had become the elders of the community, respected and loved. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, the town threw them a celebration. The whole community gathered, now numbering in the hundreds, to honor the couple who had been there through so much of Abiquiu's transformation. People spoke about what Warren and Hannah had meant to them, the lives they had touched, the example they had set. Warren stood to say a few words, his arm around Hannah's waist. They were both in their 50s now, weathered by time and the harsh New Mexico climate, but still strong. "When I came to this town 25 years ago," Warren said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "I was a broken man. I had wasted my youth on selfish pursuits, and I did not think there was any hope for me. But Hannah saw something in me I could not see in myself. She taught me about faith, about grace, about the possibility of redemption. Everything good in my life since then flows from that first Sunday when I stood and listened to her read Scripture. She gave me faith, and she gave me love, and those 2 gifts transformed my entire existence." He turned to look at Hannah, whose eyes were bright with tears. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children and the life we have built together. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is the nature of what we have. It just keeps growing. Hannah stood on her toes to kiss him, and the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. It was a perfect moment, full of joy and community and love. They lived another 15 years after that celebration. They saw their children have children of their own, saw Abiquiu continue to grow and prosper, saw the Wild West slowly become the modern West. Through it all, they remained each other's constant companions, best friends and lovers and partners in all things. Hannah passed away in the winter of 1922 in her sleep, with Warren holding her hand. She was 60 years old, and she died peacefully, surrounded by family. Warren grieved her deeply, but he also felt gratitude for the 40 years they had shared. She had been the great love of his life, the person who had seen his potential and helped him become it. He lived another 3 years, spending his final days surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories and offering wisdom. On his last day, as he lay in bed struggling to breathe, his eldest granddaughter asked him what he had learned in his long life. Warren thought for a moment, then smiled. I learned that it is never too late to change, that grace is real and available to anyone who seeks it. That love can transform even the most broken person into something beautiful. Your grandmother taught me all of that on a Sunday morning when I was 24 years old and thought I was beyond hope. She was wrong. I was not beyond hope. None of us are. That is the message I want you all to remember. It is never too late, and you are never beyond hope. Those were his last words. He died that night in the same house he had built with his own hands, in the town that had become his home, at peace with himself and with God. At his funeral, the new minister read from Psalms, the same passage Hannah had read that first Sunday. "He restoreth my soul," the minister intoned, and everyone who had known Warren understood the perfect appropriateness of those words. His soul had been restored, had been made new, and he had spent his long life proving that restoration was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of change. Years later, when William was an old man himself, he would tell his own grandchildren the story of how their great-grandfather had been a troubled cowboy who found faith and love on a Sunday morning in 1882. He would tell them about Hannah reading scripture to minors, about Warren standing up for what was right, about two people building a life together from courage and grace. He would tell them so they would know where they came from, so they would understand that their family's legacy was one of redemption and transformation. The story became part of Abiquiu's history, told whenever people gathered to remember the old days. The tale of the scripture-reading woman and the cowboy who found salvation, whose love had helped transform a rough mining camp into a real community. Their names were remembered with fondness and respect, and the values they had embodied lived on through their descendants. The house Warren built still stood decades later, eventually becoming a historical landmark. The church where Hannah preached still held services. The mining claim Warren worked was eventually played out, but the land remained in the family, a reminder of how far they had come from that first desperate Sunday. And in that way, though Warren and Hannah themselves passed from the world, their love endured. It endured in the children they raised, in the community they helped build, in the lives they had touched, in the story that continued to be told. It was a love born of faith and courage, tested by hardship and proven through time, and it had become eternal not through any grand gesture but through simple, daily faithfulness. That was the real miracle of Warren and Hannah's story. Not that a cowboy found faith and love in a single day. though he had. But that he and Hannah had taken that beginning and built upon it for 40 years, creating something solid and good and lasting. They had proven that redemption was not just a moment but a lifetime, not just an individual journey but a shared one, not just a spiritual truth but a practical reality. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death. But it also transcended death, living on in memory and legacy, and the enduring truth that love and faith can transform even the most broken among us into something beautiful. Warren had come to Abiquiu seeking redemption, and found it in the most unexpected way, through the love of a good woman and the grace of a God who never gave up on him. It was a simple story in many ways, the tale of one man's transformation and one couple's love. But simple stories are often the most profound because they remind us of the basic truths that govern human existence. That change is possible, that love heals, that faith sustains, that grace abounds, that even the most lost can be found. Warren and Hannah lived those truths, and in doing so, they created a legacy that would outlive them by generations. A testament to the power of love and faith to redeem, restore, and make all things new.